Imagine a future where entire regions transform into flourishing innovation hubs, where capturing carbon isn't just about reducing emissions, but about creating economic opportunities. What if the path to a net zero world could generate jobs, revitalize industries, and reshape local economies? I'm Jared Thomas. I'm a business development lead at the Global CCS Institute. And at the Institute, our primary focus is on point source carbon capture leading to geological storage, as we believe this approach is crucial in achieving sufficient climate impact and emissions reduction. However, point source to geological storage is just one facet of the broader carbon management portfolio. It's like a thriving ecosystem where a diverse array of organisms each have a unique and essential role. Today we're here to explore the importance and benefits of carbon capture and storage hubs, CCS hubs. And these networks have the potential to accelerate CCS deployment by harnessing economies of scale, streamlining processes, and shortening development timelines. They also leverage synergies between point source capture and other elements of carbon management, such as carbon dioxide removal, CO2 utilization, and hydrogen production. By concentrating these benefits, CCS hubs can become powerful economic engines for local communities, generating new jobs through workforce development, and enabling existing industries to transform into low carbon opportunities. So I have the pleasure of being joined on stage by Ian Tobin, Chief Corporate and Financial Officer at Carbon Clean, Matt Young, Program Manager in Battelle's Energy and Resilience Group, Tom Dower, Vice President of Public Policy at LanzaTech, and Ryan Sandman, Legislative Affairs Representative at LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America. So if you could please give them a brief round of applause. So the first thing that I'd like to do is just turn it over here. We'll go down the row, introduce yourself, your organization, and tell us about your interest in this space and your activities. Thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me here today, Jared, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel. I'm from Carbon Clean. We're an innovator, technology leader in decarbonization technology, particularly focused on point capture. So we capture CO2 from industrial emissions, and in particular we focus on the small to medium-sized emitters, focused on those hard-to-abate industries like oil and gas, steel, cement, energy from waste, and so forth. So we're out to revolutionize this space by bringing a much more compact, truly modular solution to the market called Cyclone CC. Which offers a huge range of benefits, including significant cost reductions in the capital expenditure, through standardization, through volume, through sheer size of the unit, and bringing the footprint down to less than half of a traditional amine-based solution. And as well as that, bringing the operating cost down with our proprietary solvent and process, which we've been operating around the globe at almost 50 sites for about 8-9 years now. So the combination of that package is truly a game changer, and we believe will bring the price per ton of capture down to a level where it can make financial sense for those small to medium emitters.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Young. I work for Battelle, and if you don't know Battelle, we have been working in the subsurface element of carbon capture and storage since the late 90s, actually. So we've got more than 100 projects, mostly with DOE and other partners, and now moving into the purely commercial side of things as well. But Battelle is the world's largest nonprofit research and development company, and we have about 2,500 engineers and scientists, some of whom are working on energy and resilience, which is where I am now, others in national security and health. So I actually come from a background of national security. I not ornithology, but I did work on drones and some spacecraft, but that's the closest I've been to that. With some of the projects that I work on personally are the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative. So it's a DOE-funded effort to promote carbon capture and storage in the northeast quadrant of the United States. And a couple other DAC-related projects. One is related to a FEED study for using waste heat from the plant Farley nuclear plant in Alabama, and looking at pairing that with a direct air capture facility. And that's partnered with Air Capture and CarbonVert, who's here, the Southern Company, and others. And then most recently, Battelle was awarded the Project Cypress DAC Hub in Louisiana, and we are currently getting the flywheel spinning on that project, and I'm the project manager on that project.
Hi, everybody. Tom Dower with LanzaTech. We are a US-based carbon recycling company. We are headquartered in Skokie, Illinois, just north of Chicago. We have about 400 people at this point. We have 6 commercial scale facilities globally, and we do a really interesting mix of using waste carbon in its many forms and converting it through biology, specifically through a bacteria, which converts carbon and energy into ethanol or acetone or isopropanol or other chemicals supplies. So really the context for this conference would be to talk about our mission to put the U in CCUS. So we are all about carbon utilization and in many cases taking hard to abate sector emissions like steel mills, refineries, and others, and converting them again through biology into these downstream products that will help decarbonize those downstream processes as well, and whole other industries. So we can hit the steel industry, the chemical industry, the sustainable aviation fuel, so hitting the aviation industry all at the same time with the same project. So very exciting, using synthetic biology, AI, machine learning, et cetera, to really apply this technology. And then we can also use agricultural or forestry wastes, MSW, municipal solid wastes. We can take direct air capture CO2 plus clean hydrogen. So we have a number of different pathways that we can convert into the things that will still require carbon, even after we have so-called decarbonized the economy. We like to say it's more about defossilization or removing those emissions from our supply chains and moving away from a linear basis of using resources, extracting them, and then and creating waste that then goes underground versus truly circular supply chains, which is going to be the sustainable long-term vision for a sustainable economy. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Ryan Salmon, Laborers International Union of North America, or LIUNA for short. We represent 530,000 members predominantly within the construction sector. So any major massive infrastructure project, we probably are building it or have built it. Number one industry for us is transportation infrastructure. Number 2 is energy. And number 2 is continuously growing closer to number 1. And we build it all. Wind farms, solar panel fields, natural gas and oil pipelines, nuclear, hydro, soon to be hydrogen. So everything below the sun and including the sun. This is advantageous for all of us to get your projects permitted faster so we can put our members to work, of course. And so we have a whole sector of pipeline workers that can transition to carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And for the record, I agreed to do this prior to breaking my ankle. So apologize for the ugly display, but thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you. So the first thing I'd like to do is dive into some of the challenges associated with carbon capture and storage hubs. And we heard, Tom, about utilization. My understanding is that if you're looking at a utilization hub, you could potentially have CO2 coming from a variety of different sources. Can you talk about some of the challenges associated with either that or other challenges that you may face with your technology specifically when you're looking at hubs?
Sure. So as I said, we have a biological platform, And that biology, which uses bioreactors, doesn't really care where it gets its gases. So it can take CO2, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen in various mixtures. So the hub discussions, whether we're talking direct air capture hubs, CCS hubs, hydrogen hubs, they all are actually very synergistic for what we're trying to do. And we can convert, obviously those gases into solid fuels and chemicals that can then be easily transported. So it's really helpful. Now, getting to the challenges, certainly we've had a whole day of conversation about challenges. I guess the question is where to start. One of them is we have all this amazing policy and great advances that have happened in recent years. But getting those details right and actually just getting the details finalized is a huge impediment to deploying projects in the U.S. currently. We've had some difficulties in the past with policy. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, we make ethanol as our sort of product of first resort. If you capture industrial emissions and feed them to biology, you can't get a RIN or a renewable identification number through the RFS. And if you want to sell ethanol in America, you typically need a RIN to compete with everybody else who's making ethanol. So we've had a real difficulty deploying in the US because of that policy barrier. So now we're looking towards the great incentives from the infrastructure law, from the IRA, et cetera, and really 45Q, 45Z, 45V, all the 45s, and getting those details nailed down quickly enough to make them actually useful to deploying in the US, I think is probably the biggest challenge right now. We've got lots of emission sources all around the country that we could use. We have lots of policies that could support what we're trying to do, but connecting those dots in a way around real projects in real places and without those details and really knowing what the economics are going to be, how much is that hydrogen, how much is that carbon capture incentive going to be, are really, for me, top of mind. Of course, I'm the policy guy, so similar to comments earlier, policy seems to be the problem that needs to be solved from our end.
So I look at this just because of my background from more of a technical perspective and looking at implementation of your technology specifically into a hub. Maybe you're still able to come up with a standard that you deploy and you seek this standardization pathway. And maybe hubs don't stop that. Do they help you with the policy aspect, or compared to an individual project, are there any differences there when you look at the policy piece?
At this point, I'd say it's really TBD because I don't have good examples of a scenario going through a hub and a scenario not going through a hub in the U.S. currently. Our commercial projects are all deployed internationally currently. But I think the concept of hubs is really compelling to me because I think you can pull together so many different resources, many of which would be needed in individual projects anyway. So if you can get that synergy where you're using the same deployment, the same technologies, the same electron production, et cetera, that's needed for multiple technologies in one place, then I think you're ahead of the curve and sort of gets to the permitting challenges we spoke about earlier, or other panels spoke about. So I think there are quite a lot of opportunities in working through hubs. And for us, since we can use a varied input of gases, that should help us as well, rather than being a bespoke to one particular project making one particular thing. We have a lot of flexibility, so we should be a key player in hubs.
Great, thank you. And Matt, sort of in the same vein, with your work from the Cypress DAC Hub, straying away from policy, getting more into community engagement, how can we ensure that these projects are actively engaging the community, and maybe are there any lessons that you can pass on from that work that you're doing now?
Sure. The Project Cypress DAC Hub, the proposal, the FOA, was very focused on the community engagement aspect. I think that was 20% of the selection criteria. So we put a lot of focus on that. I guess this particular hub is using multiple direct air capture technologies, Climeworks and Heirloom, and with the possibility of it opening up further in the future. But we immediately started reaching out, even during the proposal phase, to start engaging with some of the stakeholders in the area and just getting an understanding of their concerns and how to shape a response to those concerns and to present some of the benefits that the hub would bring. So again, lots of different types of hubs. You know, Battelle is also involved in the ARCH2 hydrogen hub, which is really a completely different animal, still a hub, but in that case, it's across 4 different states and lots of different sites. So slightly different approaches to community engagement, but I think the most important thing is to start out just a meet and greet and listening to some of those concerns in the community, and sort of looking at the spectrum of different stakeholders that might be affected by the project. And then from there, we're building what we're calling a community engagement council, where we will pull in representatives from that spectrum of community stakeholders, and kind of using them as a stepping stone to learn about the community and to reach out to the community about the project.
Great. Ryan, we talk about community engagement, and I hope that we'll be able to talk about how LiUNA interfaces with project developers related to, for instance, the apprenticeship requirements and prevailing wage. But the first question I have is, does your organization help with that community engagement piece? Because I know that you must be actively involved there.
Yeah, for sure. And I apologize, this booth just radiates heat up here. It's so hot. So that's why I'm sweating. Yeah, so what are the things? Yeah, thanks, Tom. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is our work, right, and our workforce. And so when you use our a unionized workforce, whether you sign a PLA or you commit to an MOU, we satisfy the requirements. We take that football and we run with it. Another aspect that we do is you bring an entire organization of staff with you too, right? We have a communications department, we have a lobbying shop, we have invest our pension funds in these projects, right? So we bring so much more to the table than just satisfying the IRA requirements, because we want to get these projects built on time and on budget correctly, just as fast as everybody else in here.
Great, thank you. Ian, when we look at hubs, we talked about utilization, DAC, carbon capture and storage. Do you have an opinion on, which of these you expect to progress faster than the others?
Yeah, I mean, look, hubs at the moment are a great start for the type of emitter that we're chasing, so small to medium, because there's a two-way relationship that works very well around hubs. Firstly, the hub developer, the transport, the storage actually needs to have enough capacity take up to justify the investment to go through FID. And the other side of the coin is that these smaller emitters, these independent emitters, need surety that there is transportation and storage in the vicinity so that the cost is kept competitive, because they face much higher marginal costs than larger operators. So I think the opportunity is there for the two to work in tandem, and I think there's the opportunity there for policy to drive that Symbian relationship. A lot of the funding is focused on DAC, is focused on H2 at the moment, which is fine. That's a good thing to get started, but it wouldn't take much of a tweak in policy to say, well, okay, we'll fund DAC, we'll fund H2, provided you're actually taking along the small to medium emitters. And the key here really is that, and this is the model we're pursuing, to get these costs down, to get the size of the units down, to be able to deploy these in a modular way where you avoid expensive feed studies, bespoke designs, which is the only way you can make this affordable for small to medium emitters. We need volume. We need to produce at scale, and that's our ambition. But to do that, you've got to have some sort of catalyst to get this going. You've got to have a catalyst where small and medium emitters are part of the equation. And I do feel they're kind of left out of the equation at the moment in terms of those hub focuses. So we welcome hubs. We would just like it tweaked a bit to bring us along for the journey. And I think once you've done that, you can actually roll that technology out to small to medium operators or emitters that are not actually close to the hubs, because you'd have brought the cost down, you'd have made it cost effective.
So is there, considering that, is there any first mover advantage in the space?
I think there is, because you get the benefit of the infrastructure being put in place and your proximity to that infrastructure. I think the other advantage, it's Symbiont again with DAC. DAC is actually expensive today in terms of the cost of a ton captured. You know, it's very low concentration CO2 that it's processing. You have to process a lot of the air to actually get the same capture, which is why it's so energy intensive. Actually, point capture, which is anything up to sort of 15–18% concentration in the flue gas, is actually a much more efficient place to take that CO2 out. So actually, if you can balance the two in a Symbiont relationship, it's a win-win for everybody.
Okay, great. Matt, I'm curious, in your work with the community and Project Cypress, DAC Hub, maybe you've developed, or Battelle's developed a reputation on working with community leaders. Have you been approached at all to have a request, hey, come develop a hub or come look at our area? You know, we've got the geology, we've got the workforce. Has that happened?
It has, and we've engaged with a few parties in that sort of, from that sort of angle. Of course, you're looking for the right combination of proximity to storage, inexpensive power, you know, access to renewables. So you have to factor that into it. But and you're also looking for a community who is polling for the hub. Rather, that would be preferred to pushing the idea.
Okay, great. So maybe this is just one for the group here. You know, what do you see? Because I think I directed the first question about challenges to an individual. What do you see as the greatest hurdles for hub development now, whether that's policy, technology, the community aspect? Whoever wants to go.
I'll throw out there that Class 6 permitting to get things moving is really important. We've got incentives from 45Q and other opportunities like that. Of course, we'd like for that to be more long-term and more permanent, but if we could get some of these storage opportunities moving, then we can build hubs around those. So like in the case of the direct air capture hub, especially initially, we're not going to have a capacity to warrant the expense of a large storage facility by itself. So in that way, we are somewhat dependent on other point source capture technologies to further support a particular storage site.
I could jump in if it's okay, even though I partly answered this question already, but the more specific answer for us at the moment, and this will particularly be through the carbon utilization lens, is that even though carbon utilization was included in 45Q going back to the 2018 legislative updates, it took until 2021 to get sort of the guidance from the IRS out, so 3 years later. And even now, if you're going down the carbon utilization route for non-enhanced oil recovery, you have to prove out life cycle analysis. So we're still caught up in the same debate with Department of Energy, for example, on what counts as carbon utilization. How do you account for displacement of goods that are otherwise made from unabated virgin fossil fuels? So there are still challenges to actually getting projects approved in the U.S. under 45Q. And then with the IRA updates, the numbers moved up, but there was no rhyme or reason from what I remember from when 45Q did allow utilization in 2018, that there's this discrepancy in value between CCU and CCS. Once we capture carbon, we're doing a lot with it. We're actually putting a whole manufacturing process on the end of it. So there's lots of expenses that one could say are very parallel to the compression, transportation, and sequestration costs. So strongly supporting CCU parity. There's a CCU Parity Act, if you're following in Congress as well, to give carbon utilization the same level of credit available for carbon sequestration in 45Q. And then those other corollary policies that I was mentioning before, like 45V, which I see as really the lifeblood or the grease between these programs and the hydrogen hubs, for example, in this similar parallel to 45Q for CCUS. But if you don't get the financial incentives aligned, these hubs are going to sort of be hanging out there, and these projects are, maybe going to be on the edge. And if they can't get the financing because they can't figure out the financial incentives that are supposed to be in place, but are still big question marks to us and to our financiers, then I fear that everything can sort of come crashing down like a house of cards. So you really need all of these policies to work together. If any one key piece of the policy is missing, then you're in trouble.
So look, I don't think there's any actual major technological or geographical barriers to this. Carbon Clean actually funded a study by the EFI Foundation, and there's 4 regions in the US which actually have a great combination of storage availability and combined with a very big pool of potential emitters to grab the CO2 from. And so there's plenty there for us to be focusing on. And I pick up the point actually that Tom just made. I think I'll come back to it in just a second. I think the finance is one of the biggest issues here, and how you put that finance together, especially for those small to medium emitters. But I mean, the US today, 25% of industrial emissions come from small to medium emitters. That's 266 million tons per annum. Globally, it's actually about 60%. So these smaller emitters have their own challenges, but one of the biggest challenges is finance. And at the moment, we do have these rules where it's grant or loan. Really, there's no sense in that. It should be grant and loan at this stage to get the uptake. So that could be quite a simple win for these small to medium emitters to actually make the whole project viable. But I go back to the point again I made earlier. I think there's a huge benefit to latching on to these hubs in terms of transport and storage, because those FID-ing transport and storage projects need more than just those anchor tenants that they get from DAC or from H2 projects. And similarly, to make the projects viable for small to medium emitters, they need surety around that transport and storage. So it's a win-win with those small policy changes.
I think for us, it's going to be project certainty, and that incorporates everything from finance to permitting, because in the construction sector is extremely unique in that every time our members go to work, they're actively working themselves out of a job. When you finish the tunnel, you go onto the highway. When you finish the highway, you go onto the pipeline, and so on and so forth. So for us, regardless of what certainty means, it incorporates it all. If you say have a CO2 pipeline that's about to be built, and all of a sudden a lawsuit comes in, junction on it. Well, our workers say, well, when can we go back to work? Like, well, I don't know. It could be a couple months. It could be a year. Like, well, no, I have a car payment tomorrow. I owe my mortgage or my rent. So for us, it's making sure that these projects are not just certain, but that are on time and on budget for so many different aspects. The other misnomer about construction workers that we're waiting in the wind, right? All right, now I got my environmental impact statement. I've gotten approved. Where I need a workforce. Well, we were there a while ago, but no one's just going to sit around. Our guys are hourly paid, right? So if they're not working, they're not getting paid. And so if you don't have project certainty, then the blame falls back on us, right? Like, well, we don't have the workforce. Well, we did, but now they're going to go work on that road or that bridge or that highway. So project certainty for us is definitely got to be number one.
So what can, maybe federal government has a role to play there. What can state governments do as well? Maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think there's 4 relatively simple things that they could do. I think first of all, from a tax perspective, they can make this a pollution control exercise. They can give tax breaks for capturing CO2 because, if you take Carbon Clean's process, NOx and SOx, we actually strip that out of the flue gas as well as part of our process. So there are added benefits for the environment that are beyond just the CO2 capture. I think secondly, routing and siting, where there are these transportation projects, how can they use state facilities, state influence to wave through the routing of these transport networks? That makes a big difference. I think, excuse me, the long-term injection site liability is another issue. I think in California it's after 99 years, but again, everything's about certainty. If you want the private sector to take up the mantle, you have to provide certainty. So you need a situation where the state will take on the liability once these are closed and full. And finally, I think state primacy for the permitting. I think getting it moving and getting that permitting in place for the repurposing of the wells is critical. So I think those four things would make quite a big difference at a state level.
Any other thoughts?
I'll add one that I wonder if the states can help with the outreach related to these hubs. I think there's benefit to not just having each individual developer, each individual storage entity doing their own sort of outreach about what is CCS, how does this work, or what is DAC. If the states and/or, in this case, we also have regional initiatives right now that we hope will continue through Carbon Base and other pending projects, that we can create sort of, or leverage, I guess, common messaging across all the hubs to say that this is carbon capture and storage, this is why it's safe, this is how it benefits you, these are the risks, here's what we're taking to address those risks. So I think the states could play a role in that, and I think Jessica mentioned West Virginia and the other states having their own sort of initiatives in that space.
I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues, but also add that every state is different and every project is different. And so to the extent that the state governments can help look at the sort of ecosystem around potential projects, and whether that be geology, transportation, energy needs, et cetera, and see which tools they have at their disposal to maybe help take care of those, whereas we might have a sort of broad brush federal approach to policy. The states can get much more specific and say, and some examples would be sustainable aviation fuel. There are some state level tax credits that are there to help incentivize the U.S. production of aviation fuel. Similarly, hydrogen, there's a number of hydrogen tax credit proposals in states, and then working obviously through permitting and other issues. And I definitely agree with the point that Matt just made on all levels of government, all levels of industry, labor, environmental groups that are supportive or understand the real science behind what we're talking about. At all levels, we all need to be doing education about what it is we're talking about, because the general public has no idea from a general sense. And I don't blame them. People don't spend time thinking about this. They think about paying that mortgage payment, about putting food on the table, et cetera.
Right. I mean, I always argue, a developer asks us, well, when should we get in touch with you? Like, well, if you think about it, you're already behind. Getting in touch with us from the get-go means that we show up to local town halls and local meetings, and getting rid of that misnomer of, well, I don't want this project built under my, in my community. Well, we often work in the same communities in which we live, right? We have local hire provisions. So the kids go to the same schools, or you go to the same grocery store. One of the things we pride ourselves on is we have training centers across in every single state, and some in multiple states. And so we try to make that advocacy that, like, listen, we live in the same places in which these projects are getting built.
Let's say you've got the certainty for these projects, then you've got to have somebody step into that developer role for these hubs. And Battelle, you're kind of doing that for the Cypress, Matt, for the Cypress DAC hub. Will that continue for your organization? Who should it be? Should it be someone else? How does that look?
We'll see. Like I said, a hub can be a lot of different things. And in the case of these federal public-private partnerships, Battelle saw a role to help support the proposal process, to help with the community engagement process, the communications, and being sort of technology agnostic, an honest, not honest, but a broker of multiple entities coming together. So that was a role that we thought we could play here, and there are probably other ways to do it, many other ways. Maybe they're based around storage, maybe they're based around emissions, but we're going after it this direction for now.
I think some would say that it could be based around transportation, obviously what we've seen in the Midwest, and the entities that are giving those pipelines CO2 certainly seems like to me they would have a vested interest in ensuring that project goes forward. Should they have a more active role, and this is for us, should they have a more active role in every aspect, community engagement, or should it really just be one, lead? Just interesting to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I can jump in if helpful. I think all hub participants need to have an oar in the water, and I think the coordinators of the various kinds of hubs can certainly be on point and can help provide information to the hub members about the challenges that are being faced and what levels of society, government, et cetera, are going to need help. But ultimately, we're all trying to do some really difficult stuff and complicated things and new things in many cases that have to be explained not just to John Q. Public, but even to regulators, to academics, to PhDs, right, in universities and the highest levels of government, where they may have some idea of what's happening, but not really the full scope. And again, I wouldn't expect anyone to, but I think that takes everybody, because you have a lot of different angles at which you can have a conversation with somebody, and none of us in any of these positions can have that conversation with everybody, right? So you really need to pull everybody into it.
Ian, I often say that, and we talked about this a bit earlier, that process standardization or intensification is going to be essential for small and mid-tier emitters, whether or not you're considering a hub. I say that often. Do I have it right, first of all? And what opportunities really exist for those small and mid-tier emitters considering that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I go back to the point earlier. I mean, if I look on a global basis, more than 60% of industrial CO2 emissions come from small to medium emitters. And the vast majority of those plants are actually in urban, suburban areas with very limited real estate. So actually, the traditional bespoke, semi-modular or fully bespoke solutions just don't work for these emitters. They're just too big, they're too expensive, they take too long. And so what you really need is a product that's very standard, because you bring the cost down. You're not going through a custom build, a custom design every stage. And that's what a product like Cyclone CC that we're producing is all about. We plan to produce these on a production line. And instead of taking 18 to 24 months to design and install a carbon capture solution, we deliver it on the back of trucks and install it, and it's done in 6 months. And of course, this shrinks the whole size of it as well. So we use rotating pack beds where we intensify the interaction between the solvent and the flue gas. This saves energy, but it also saves space. So that's actually a 10-fold reduction in the equipment needed for that interaction process. And we do the same with both the absorption and the stripping. And then there's lots of other wins when you get into a unit like that, like heat recovery, as well as new solvent technologies that we're working on. And when you put all these together over the few years ahead, we see a very dramatic drop in the price per ton captured for small to medium emitters. It's something they could never achieve through the standard approach that we have today of designing a bespoke solution. So there's all to play for. It solves the space problem. It solves the cost problem. I think the other really exciting things for us, for small and medium emitters, we see the future as carbon capture as a service. Instead of these small to medium emitters having to find the capital to buy the equipment and then run the plant, they don't really want to do that. They just want to pay a price per ton, know it's captured, compressed, transported, and then utilized or stored. They don't want to run that. They don't want to focus on their business. And much as software has gone down that route, we believe that carbon capture is going to go down that route. And a product like Cyclone CC in this modular standardized approach is perfect for this, because actually you can move it around. You know, if a plant shuts down or a plant is reconfigured, you just move the Cyclone CC solution. You've never been able to do that with carbon capture plants till now. So this lends itself really, really well, both in terms of the cost and the scale, but also its flexibility to that goal, which is what we want to see as a product offering that solves the financing issue in the medium term.
Thank you. Tom, I saw a presentation from your CEO about a year ago, and she said that that your organization is ultimately targeting the commodities markets. First of all, is that still true? Can you tell us maybe, are there benefits to using a hub model to get there? You've already got operating facilities today, and you know, I mean, are you essentially able to make it with the facilities that you have now?
Yeah, so yes, short answer, that is still what we're going after. And what commodity means to me are chemicals that are at the base of the supply chain. So we're taking waste carbon in its many forms and converting it through biology into fuels and chemicals. Those are the things that will still require carbon as their central molecule going forward, well after we've decarbonized the economy. Our projects do pencil out. I mean, we don't really build a project unless it pencils. And the beauty of CCU, and this kind of goes to some of the points made earlier on financing, is, you know, we are valorizing a waste, right? We do actually have a product that is sellable in the market at the end. Now, a lot of these markets are new and they're nascent, and we can talk about voluntary carbon markets and other ways to assign value, including some of these other environmental values that have been talked about, that we're often looking through a straight greenhouse gas perspective, but there are often some other attendant benefits that are not really taken into account in most policy environments. But then converting those into those basic chemicals that are at the base of the economy, which is not to say that they're not valuable, because they, you know, the value of ethylene, for example, is in the hundreds of billions of dollars around the world. We can do that at individual projects, at individual sites, but the customers that we work with, if you go to our website, you can see some of the actual consumer-facing brands, from Zara dresses to Lululemon shorts, On shoes, the foam midsoles. We're making Gucci fragrances, all from steel mill off-gases today. And so there are lots of really interesting chemical plays to be had. Now, if we could aggregate those in a hub and do those where there are other synergies, like a petrochemical refinery, which we can just plug into that refinery, you know, using the waste carbon-based resources. So then you maintain those jobs, you can continue the industrial production that would otherwise have happened there, and take advantage of all of those existing supply chains. So it really becomes a drop-in, not just as a fuel or additive or something, but also as at the beginning of the supply chain. I think there's lots of synergies there. So for us, it's really either or both, because we do also offer, you know, we could be on the back end of an ethanol facility, which loses, you know, a third or more of its original carbon as CO2. There's a lot of conversation today about aggregating that and sending it in pipelines to CCS, but, you know, we could also just put our biorefinery on the back end of an ethanol facility and, coincidentally enough, make ethanol, which is what they make. And so that seems like a pretty good idea. But we need hydrogen to do that, so then we're in the sort of hydrogen discussion as well to be able to use that CO2. So anyway, I think we can do either one, but the more synergies you can get, the more ways you can use infrastructure for multiple purposes, for multiple parts of the economy, the better. You get more political support too, you get more community support, and you create or retain more jobs.
Are you targeting, you talked about hydrogen, one avenue over the other, blue versus green?
low carbon. We are color agnostic, and we've joined the Open Hydrogen Initiative, which a number of other entities in the room, I'm sure, are participating in as well, to really get at the heart of what is the life cycle analysis around hydrogen, and just making sure, for us, if the life cycle analysis on the greenhouse gases doesn't pencil out, we won't do the project. I mean, our whole ethos is about solving the climate crisis, so we absolutely need that. But yeah, if you can bring us low carbon hydrogen and you can prove it, we'll take it for a reasonable price.
So Matt, before I go through the last question that I usually like to ask about what you lose sleep over at night, I'm sure that you've been approached by a lot of these small and mid-tier emitters that we keep talking about. What are you telling them? Because bespoke projects are challenging, and we haven't gotten to the point where there's a mass deployment of a standard offering, across the market. What do you say to them?
I think, so I haven't been personally involved in a whole lot of the commercial CCS projects going on at Battelle, but I know I think it's been said today that the priority is to get some of these high percentage CO2 waste streams first, and then move out from there. But again, I think once storage opportunities are in place and connective transport between them, the small and mid scales will quickly join in, I expect.
Just real quick, what are we thinking when we talk about small and mid-tier emitters in terms of capacity? Usually I say somewhere around 500 tons of CO2 per day. Is that about right?
That's pretty much what we class. We might go a little larger than that, but yeah, 500 to 1,000 tons per day. And again, not all emitters necessarily want to capture all of their CO2 emissions in one go. So again, smaller modular solutions like Cyclone CC, you can actually you could deploy one at 300 tons per day. If you're a 1,000 ton per day site, you could add another and another later on. So it's sort of step change as well. While you learn the technology, you learn the economic case, so it's less risky for them. But that's the target range, the sweet spot for us.
Okay, great. So now the question, what do you lose sleep over at night? Preferably related to what we're talking about here, but it could be anything.
I think from my perspective, a nascent industry of any kind, but this particularly where there's a lot of investment required in the capital, it's policy certainty. That policy certainty has to be 10, 15, 20 years. There's quite a bit of political uncertainty this year. I forget the statistic, isn't it? Something like 75% of the democratic world is facing elections this year with all sorts of potential outcomes to that. So this is, I think, right now actually holding some investment back. People are waiting to see what happens once we get through that climate. But for me, that's what it's all about. We're at that stage of the industry where policy is everything. It's driving the uptake, and we need it stable.
Go down the line here.
Sure.
So for the Cypress DAC Hub being DOE funded, I think, and Harry talked about this as the NEPA process and kind of aligning that schedule as a project manager with the corporate goals of our DAC developers, and how to get those two aligned and how to balance that as we report budgets and schedules going forward. So how quickly can that NEPA process move on a hub, which I don't think has been really addressed yet? And how do you approach that with DAC developers who have made pre-purchase agreements with investors who need to have capacity coming online in a certain amount of time?
So the professional thing that I lose sleep over is related to, but it's also personal, is leaving a sustainable planet for my kids. And that is translated for me in here in Washington into sustainable policy that works, that's understandable, that's aligned, and what is really causing me a lot of heartburn currently is the pressure to have the perfect be the enemy of the good, to make sure that every policy is just so perfect and every technology that we deploy, crosses every T and dots every I in a way that even if it takes 15 to 20 years to do it, let's not deploy it until that moment in time. And I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding among policymakers and some advocates around how technology deployment actually works, and that it is iterative. It takes time. You've got to deploy a lot early, and it will never be perfect by very definition. And so if we don't get over this, we're going to lose another 10 or 15 years, and then we're already not going to hit the targets that we have set for ourselves. And that really concerns me. So I just would, it's sort of a plea that we get going, we get moving. It's not all going to be perfect. We have to make sure it's safe. We have to make sure that people aren't harmed and that communities are improved. But if we don't, we are all going to pay the price.
I mean, for us, it's truly going to be what this industry means for construction workers. I think construction, specifically the workers, are commonly overlooked when looking at some of these projects overall, and the amount of work hours, and let me rewind for a second. We typically measure projects not by how many jobs they create, but by how many work hours they create. Because I always said you could have create 1,000 jobs for a week or 1,000 jobs for a year, obviously the year being the latter, so we typically measure them by how many hours. It would be in the millions and millions of hours for these projects. And in 2018, I think we did the most we've ever done. We did about, I think, 19 million work hours in natural gas pipeline alone. We have an entire workforce devoted to pipelines. We were worried in the sense that, like, all right, we have this entire trained workforce. We see the numbers ticking down. We see that industry, hopefully, but we're teetering down within the pipeline sector. CCS, hydrogen, all of that takes that workforce and can apply. From a construction side, it's almost identical when you're putting these pipelines together. Honestly, it's minor changes and a little bit of a difference in material, but for us in the construction sector, they're very identical. So now we have this opportunity to move that entire workforce over and start on down this path. So I think what keeps me up at night is to not recognize the potential for our workers out there.
Great. So we've got about 8.5. Well, let's go ahead and give a brief round of applause for the panelists up here. We have about 8.5 minutes for questions. So please, anyone.
Yeah, from an emitter, a capture entity standpoint, with an offtake agreement, are you all seeing any hesitation to commingle CO2 in a pipeline, commingle it in a storage hub from an MRV, recapture a 45Q standpoint, kind of legal terms and conditions there? I mean, y'all, I don't know if any of y'all are operators, but it is storage hubs. So I'm assuming you're commingling sources from point source, DAC, other emitters. When you're putting all this CO2, mixing it together, different purities, different pressures coming off of each of these capture entities.
There's a lot of.
I think this is you, Matt.
I wish I knew how to answer that question.
Maybe if I'll chime in for my own interest, Richard. There's some technical aspects there too, because you mentioned different purities. And you're looking at like the LanzaTech technology, for instance. Does that matter? I mean,
no. Short answer.
Really?
No.
Okay.
We can take gases as they are. In fact, I haven't talked about it much, but we don't need to do all the capture amine concentration, all of that kind of stuff with the high energy penalties. We take essentially gases as they are. Now we're looking for certain volumes of gases and in concentrations, particularly carbon monoxide, that gives us carbon and energy. But if we get CO2, we need hydrogen, right? So, but we can take those and we're processing them at near ambient pressures and temperatures as well. So that's just because we're using biology. It's just, it's almost magic, but it's actually just science. Yeah. So, but we don't have that issue. Now, we could be utilization companies. We could obviously pull CO2 from that whole system. And in other realms, we are looking at book and claim, whether that's sustainable aviation fuel or how we source hydrogen or renewable natural gas. There are lots of examples of using book and claim to make sure you're tracing the actual characteristics of molecules. So I would think in the same way about CO2, but it's a really good question, Richard.
I think there's a couple of things I would just say to it. I think it's early days actually of putting all this together, where we are putting all these different sources of CO2 into one pipe and transporting it. But ultimately, there will be standards for the storage. So everything that goes into that transportation's got to meet certain standards before it gets into the transportation. But actually, most processes, if they're good technology, produce pretty clean CO2 anyway. Ours is near food grade when it comes out of the process. So I think it's early days to see how that is, but I think it'll be addressed by you having to reach a certain standard to put it into that network.
From a construction sector, we'd like one individual pipeline for each single product. For the record.
Steve.
I'm not sure how much of your revenue stream depends on 45Q. Battelle, being a charitable trust, probably can't use the tax credit. I think you have a commercial business that you're trying to set up for this. So, two-part question. Number one, how important, do you have the tax appetite for 45Q? And if you don't have the tax appetite, what's the discount that you're looking at for 45Q to transfer that tax credit to a third party?
Look, it's very important right now. I mean, it's probably the most important policy from a CCUS point of view from our perspective, because otherwise it's just simply a cost for these emitters to capture it and store it. So that offset's really important. It's why we've been waiting for the detail to come out of how this is going to operate. So in our modeling for US projects, it's a critical factor. I think, again, it's early days as to whether you trade that tax credit at a discount and you get a credit in another way. I think that's still to be worked out. It's still early days because we've only just had the detail announced on those credits. So it's a really good question. My basic answer is it's really important, and I think it's one of the most important things that's been announced globally for CCUS.
I would say on the Cypress hub, the financial models are moving through our developer partners rather than through Battelle specifically. So that's the approach we're taking there. And I can't speak to the details on that, but that in general, that's how we're approaching it.
And it's not an issue for us necessarily, but there are, just having worked on the IRA, there are the direct pay and transferability provisions there that were specifically meant to get at those issues. Now, whether they're adequate or not, and whether the IRS guidance is good enough or not, I'll leave to individual taxpayers and individual projects. But those were contemplated in the updates to 45Q and the other tax credits in the IRA.
Other questions? And maybe one from myself, and Ryan, this is for you, and it's because I didn't ask it earlier. You mentioned work with us early. You drove that point home. Who are you looking to be the one to reach out for you? If I'm a developer, I'm working with an EPC, with a technology provider, with a series of different companies, maybe an infrastructure company. Who fills that role? Is it the EPC? Is it the developer?
I mean, getting in touch with, the local building trades council at any point, as soon as you get pen to paper, we will, like I said earlier, we have an entire team on state, federal, local levels that will help get these projects through. So I lobby on behalf of the organization predominantly within energy infrastructure. When I find out that, yeah, this developer, this contractor is going to wants to build this project, we fight tooth and nail at every agency here to get that project approved. And if we don't, we'll still keep fighting for that project, right? We don't stop until we put our members to work. We want to do this correctly. We want to make sure it's done, with speed, but done right the first time. But we have a whole team across the country that will do whatever they can to fight for the work and to make sure that we put our members to work.
I think y'all fixed a bridge in Pennsylvania, I believe, in like 12 days. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that was us.
Amazing. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. The governor called the local Philadelphia Building Trades Council, and they pulled as many members as they could out of the out-of-work list. It was supposed to take 3 weeks, and we could put 95 back up in 12 days.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah. I did it all, Yeah.
So any other questions before we close the panel? Okay, great. One final round of applause for the great panelists. Thank you.